That's the date of the first piece in their collection, the capacity for all in wonder.
I was back in was that 59?
That's 59. That's what we have in the collection.
Oh, yeah,
I hope it's accurate. Yeah.
And but again, that was written as a speech.
Yes, right.
And it was a fairly good speech,
Yes.
which Larry Kremen, I saw him sitting up there in the audience, up in the balcony, checking out this Huebner guy.
He was still on the faculty then, not president.
Oh yeah, no, he was chairman of the department.
Right.
Virgil Herrick had been elected to the National Academy,
Right.
Is that the title of National Academy?
Like the National Academy of Education.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so he and Larry Kremen were close because Larry was also involved. And when I first went to Teachers College, I may have told you this, when I first went to Teachers College, Larry met me in the hall one day, and I don't remember if this is my first year or second year or when. He said, Dwayne, I'd be glad to help you develop skills in historical research. And I said, I don't know what I said, but in essence I said, no thank you, because I'm more interested in philosophical questions than I am in historical questions. I regret much later not having done that, but I think that would have also thrown me on the wrong track if I had done that, because Larry was not an intellectual historian. He was basically a social historian, and a really good one. So, yeah.
Transformation of the school.
Yeah.
You want to read it at some point.
Yeah, well, it's a really important book. His other histories aren't that good, but
No, that's right.
yeah.
No, it stands.
Mm-hmm.
Still.
And at Northern Illinois, there were two of us from Wisconsin, one from the University of Nebraska, who was a Whiteheadian. This was all in the curriculum field. All in.
Saylor and Alexander were there. Galen Saylor was it?
No, he was in
Lincoln, wasn't he at Lincoln then? Weren't they ever in Nebraska?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah,
He might have been.
Galen Saylor.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
And this guy did his dissertation on Whitehead. But most of the faculty at Northern Illinois were Teachers College people.
Is that right? Is that how they discovered you, or you discovered them? Or?
Well, no, they discovered me because I went there knowing not the Teachers College people, but the colleague that I had been working with at the University of Chicago and the University of Wisconsin who went there, who had been a Navy wave and was quite a bit older than I was, but a really great human being, a good educator, a good teacher. Did a dissertation with Virgil. I don't remember on what, but and she's the one that encouraged me to come to Northern Illinois. But it was at Northern Illinois then that I got to know the Teachers College group. And among them was Margaret Lindsay, who was coming as supervising or helping organize programs in teacher education at the University at Northern Illinois. And we were one of the leading teacher education groups at that time with Ball State and a variety of other people. So that's where Teachers College got to know me. Teachers College people got to know me. Plus the fact that Virgil Herrick was a close personal and colleague of Max Corey, Steve and Max Corey. Do you know Max? Well, of an interesting figure because Max is the one who was pushing action research at that time.
Was that right?
Yeah. And I'm sure that Virgil told Max to, check me out, something of this kind. After 2 years at DeKalb, Teachers College invited me to come and for a position there. And I flew out there, my first airplane flight, I remember it clearly. I flew out there and came back, and they offered me the position, and I turned them down, saying, you're not doing the kind of work that I'm interested in doing. And I'm not interested in that.
What was that a reference to, that work?
Their teacher education, they had no interest in philosophical stuff. It was all...
Teachers College.
Not in the Department of Curriculum Teaching. There was a clear separation there.
Right.
Oh, no, there were good historians and good philosophers at Teachers College, but the Department of Curriculum Teaching were all practically oriented.
It remains the same today.
Unfortunately, well, there are other stories that I can tell you about that too. So I wrote and said I'm not interested. The following year, I also received a call from Berkeley, and I think Sam Brownell was dean at that point. And I'm sure this was also another contact that Virgil Herrick made for me. And I wrote to Brownell and said I wasn't interested. And Teachers College invited me back because they had decided with Arno Belloc to indeed provide a course in the theory or something of that kind. And Arno and I then, and I don't have the exact dates on any of this, you'd need to go back through the Teachers College catalogs to see how it was all shaped up. Arno and I then developed the first course in curriculum theory, which we taught together for, I don't know how many, couple of years at least, which began to sour for the two of us, particularly over issues of power. Arno became an analytic philosopher and really pushed hard, particularly in his research and teaching, focusing in on analytic philosophy. And so he was dealing with the linguistic aspects of control and power, and I was starting to read in the field of politics and dealing more directly with the political power. And we reached a point where we couldn't teach together because we differed so much. And then he developed two different kinds of things. He did a lot in the history of education. That's when, who's the first gal that did the little thing on curriculum history? Siegel, Mary Louise Siegel, one of his students. He was going in that direction, but he was also then starting to work on his empirical studies of teaching. And Herb was working in that area with him. So we split, and not only split in terms of our intellectual, but I think our styles were so totally different that we didn't stay very compatible for very long.
When did the acquaintance with Union develop?
Yeah. Teachers College and Union Seminary, probably since the 1920s, I'm not certain of this, it might have been in the late 20s or it might have been in the 30s, had a long relationship in teacher education, in Christian education, religious education. And Teachers College had people in various departments who served as advisors in that program. Phil Phoenix was the person in in philosophy who had that connection. I don't remember who the person was in psychology, and my colleague, Paul Witt, was the person in our department, and Paul was basically a instructional materials person. I don't remember what they called it back then. Paul had enough of that, and I offered to become the advisor in that area.
Why did you do that?
Why did I do that? Well, that brings up a whole different thread of stuff that needs to be explored. And I was thinking about that either within the last day or so. Amazon has destroyed intellectual curiosity. I'm convinced of that. When I was at DeKalb and I would drive back home to Michigan, I would stop at the University of Chicago bookstore and thumb through their books. That's when I picked up Paul Tillich's Love, Power, and Justice.
Just because it was there?
Just because it was there. And I picked up some stuff. I picked up Northrop, Beating of East and West. I picked up some stuff on Eastern religions. I don't remember what they were at the present time. I picked up Buber, all because they were there. And I became interested in the religious dimension at that point, particularly Tillich. Tillich was very important for me. I have, incidentally, the 2 volumes of Tillich upstairs that you can have. But the first volume I don't have, and I regret losing that, because Tillich's chapter on knowledge in the first volume of his systematic theology really shifted me significantly, a very important book for me. I then waited anxiously for volume 2, and that was fairly good. I waited anxiously for volume 3, and that was a total bust. The man had no Christology that made any sense at all. I mean, but that's how I became interested in religion. When I went to teachers college, there were 2 bookstores of equal importance to me. One was the bookstore at Union Seminary, which was a very good bookstore. But down the street on Broadway was a bookstore in an apartment building called Cross Currents, which had the best collection of used and new books in philosophy and theology of any place. And that's where I got to know Berdyaev, God knows what else. And so I became interested as I began to deal with what was missing in education. That's where I became interested in religion as a dimension of that.
So it doesn't come from childhood.
Oh no!
It comes from an intellect.
Oh no! It doesn't come from childhood at all. I grew up in the Methodist Church, and my mother was very active in the Methodist Church. My dad, before the Depression, was very active in the Methodist Church. He served as superintendent of the Sunday school. He was on the board, or whatever it was called at that time. When the Depression came, my mother stayed in the Methodist Church. The church did nothing for my dad or for the working people in Grand Rapids. And when I got out of the Army, I went back to the Methodist Church because there was a really fine Methodist minister there who was interested in me and interested in what I was doing. And when I went to the University of Chicago, I probably went occasionally to the University Chapel. When I was at when I was teaching in Michigan, I don't think I went to church. I'm quite sure I didn't. When I was at the University of Wisconsin, I don't remember going to church. When I was at Northern Illinois, I found a really interesting Presbyterian church with a minister that I really liked, and we became very close. In fact, we did some team teaching in my child development course for a while there. He's the one who introduced me to what's the church in Chicago on the north side?
I don't know.
The beautiful structure. It's not a church. It comes out of a Hindu Buddha, out of Hindu orientation. I can't think of the name of it right now.
You went there.
Well, I went there, and primarily because of the connection with the pastor. I mean, a really interesting guy, a really nice guy, and not pushing his Christology too hard, and so I found it comfortable. When I moved to New York, I started to explore churches in that area, and went to a Presbyterian church probably in the 80s or 90s. Probably on Amsterdam Avenue. And I went into it, and there was an older preacher, and Presbyterian preachers in that period were really good for the most part, because Princeton did a fantastic job. I went in there, and there was this Presbyterian minister, middle-aged or older. The members of the congregation were all old white people, and that part of New York was heavily Hispanic and black. And I thought, that's it. I ended up trying out Riverside Church and the pastor there was a guy by the name of McCracken, who was Scottish Presbyterian. I was there once, sitting probably up in the balcony, and at the time of the collection and the bringing the offering down, the ushers were dressed in tails and white gloves. And I thought, that's not for me. And I went to St. John's Cathedral and was blown away because the canon sacrist, a guy by the name of West, I don't remember his first name, who was a fairly good preacher. But what amazed me is that when he during the Eucharist, he would hold up the wafer or the bread, I'm not sure what he was using, he would break it and the trumpets would blow. In church, it was an amazing experience. And I started going to St. John the Divine. But the other thing about St. John the Divine, behind the main altar were either 4 to 6 small chapels that were absolutely beautiful. And it's at that time that I was reading more and more in Christian mysticism and Asian mysticism. And I would go into those chapels to meditate.
Was the early 60s?
That was the late 50s and early 60s, yeah. So I had become interested in theology and religion while I was at Teachers College, and when this position when the connection between Teachers College and Union opened up, I took it, and that's where I became friends then with Bob Lynn and Ellis Nelson, and became interested in the field of religious education, and that's also then where I began to make connections with Jewish Theological Seminary and did a lot of work with the Jewish educators. In fact, almost all of the Jewish religious educators in the doctoral program were working in the field of curriculum and teaching with me. So I have a network of rabbis around the country that I've known for years, connected to. So that's how that became. It was not, the background in my religion was not at all associated with my early upbringing, because it had no bite on me at that time. It wasn't until I got into Teachers College and began to deal with my own personal life and the influence of mysticism, and the people who influenced me there would have been Edwin Underhill. Buber was a tremendous influence on me. I was doing a reasonable amount of reading in Buddhism at that time and looking at the Rhineland mystics. The other major person in that field that influenced me was Meister Eckhart and the Rhineland mystics. The Rhineland mystics and Meister Eckhart were very influential in my intellectual development.
Were any of the rabbis that you were in touch with, were they interested in the Kabbalah or Jewish mysticism?
No, they were not. My introduction to Jewish mysticism came through Walter Wink, because Walter, I don't remember which book he was writing, was dealing with Jewish mysticism. Jewish mysticism didn't intrigue me. The Baal Shem and Buber and the Jewish mystics did, but not the Kabbalah structures of it. It was indeed the Jewish, the Baal Shem, the traditions of the Baal Shem that influenced me. So that's how I got associated with religious education.
I wonder if the work at Union also provided a kind of psychological as well, intellectual contra.
Yeah, well, Bob Lynn and Ellis were very supportive of me and my work. Well, the other person who was very supportive was Mary Tully, because at one time Union had 3 really good people in religious education. Bob Lynn, dealing essentially with the history, and Bob was a skilled administrator. They wanted him to become dean, and he didn't, and finally ended up, of course, in the Lilly Foundation. Ellis Nelson was acting dean for a while and became president of Louisville and was at Texas Presbyterian Seminary. And that's where I became associated with the religious education group. And one way of doing that is that Union Seminary, the religious educators at Union Seminary, Teachers College, Princeton, and Yale would get together on a yearly basis for conversations about that religious education. And I became very involved in that group. But I'm not sure that the way theology and religion influenced my curriculum came out of the connection with that program so much as the kind of reading that I was doing at the present time.
Well, after the split from Bella, you were fairly isolated in the department.
Well,
Alice was still
Alice was my major supporter, and
Alice Lyle.
and Phil Phoenix
And Phil
was.
Phoenix.
When I left Teachers College in '82, that's when Jim Loder from Princeton published the book on, I don't remember what it was, and I had told Phil that I was leaving to go to Yale. He gave me Loder's book and said, "Just don't do anything like this, Dwayne." So Phil was very responsive, and Maxine and Phil and I were
Maxine
Greene.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, well, Maxine and I were very close for a while.
I had no idea.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It seemed that you were on, you both speak of the imagination. That's one of your challenges bequeathed, and
Yeah.
it was a major concept for her.
Yeah. No, it was.
You were both doing content philosophy. You more Heidegger, she more the French.
Yeah, she did more French. I did French too. I was heavily influenced by Merleau-Ponty
Right.
and Heidegger, more so than.
Less so for her, more Sartre.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Well,
In fact, she asked me to review Marcuse's One-Dimensional Man for the Teachers College record.
did you do that?
Yeah.
I confess it.
Yeah, that's available someplace.
So, do you mind, or is it derailing your train of thought to speak about your relationship with Maxine? She's very much in the news given her recent death.
Yeah.
And
Well, I was always impressed with. We need to go back to the history of Teachers College in some way. Maxine came in probably in the 70s, 60s at Teachers College.
I remember she did her work at NYU, and she was mothering then, and so it was the rest.
Yeah, she came in late at Teachers College.
The Teacher Stranger is 73 or 2 or something.
Okay, that was her first major work, and that's when she was at NYU when she wrote that, wasn't she?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't remember
I think
either.
she was in that 71 issue of Teachers College Record, devoted to curriculum.
Oh, okay. Well, then she probably. Well, my connections with the Department of Philosophy and History were basically with Doug Sloan, Phil Phoenix, Robbie McClintock, and Maxine, and I was probably as close to Doug and Robbie as I was to Maxine. Well, I was close to Phil, because Phil and I had shared a lot of religious educators together at that time. Maxine, I became involved once in one of her soirees in her apartment, but that didn't continue, and I'm not sure why. Maxine's work never had much impact on me.
Why do you think that was?
Well, she wasn't necessarily a systematic thinker. And I must confess that people who write easily turn me off, Bill. I struggle to write, and you and Mike and Maxine wrote so easily that
Envy.
Huh?
Is it envy?
I don't know if it's envy or not. No, because I don't envy the quality of the work.
I wonder if there was any competitive stuff going on.
Oh no, and Maxine wasn't competitive, and I wasn't competitive.
I didn't imagine you were, but I've always thought she was intensely competitive.
Well, if she did, she didn't show it to me,
Yeah.
and I didn't write. And I didn't write that much,
At
so
that
we.
time, that's right.
So no, Maxine and I had good relationships. I remember after I retired going to a meeting in in Washington, just happened to drop in, and there she was, and we had a great time together. But we weren't socially close. She came to. I had a retirement gathering from Teachers College, and she was one of the few faculty members who was invited because we were that close.
Okay. All right. Thanks for speaking.
Yeah, no, there was no, I'm not aware of anything there. She was always very supportive of my students, or the students I worked with.
Did you share students at all, or were these departments so separate?
No, I had, I don't remember.
Yeah.
No, unfortunately, the students that I had in doctoral work at Department of Curriculum and Teaching and straight curriculum teaching, the only two that were outstanding would be Gret Marine, Dershimer, and her husband, who was also a good guy, and Mike. And many of the others were not intellectually interested in the field. In fact, students at doctoral students at Teachers College tended to stay away from me in curriculum and teaching. They didn't like what I was doing. And they didn't want to be pushed the way I was pushing them. They were scared of me. Or at least that's what I got. For instance, Steve Selden, do you know Steve?
I'm sure.
Steve decided not to work with me. He didn't want to do it. Yeah.
I thought he did work with you. He claimed you later.
He didn't do the dissertation with me.
I see.
Yeah, he didn't want to do it. Jeez.
Yeah, right. He's retired now too, I think.
Has he?
I think.
I've never read his book.
Yeah.
He worked on that for years and years and
You've
years.
done everything right.
It was a good book, I gather.
Yeah, that's right.
Mike continued to support him. Mike and Steve stayed good friends
That's right.
for years, yeah. Well, that sort of gives you the thrust. Oh, well, through a couple other things. My major competitors in the Department of Curriculum and Teaching were John Goodlab students, Ann Lieberman and Gary Griffin.
Well, Anne, I think, is still there, isn't she?
She went back, yeah, and Gary also went back.
Did he go back? He went to Arizona for a while.
He went to Arizona as a dean, I think, and then came back to Teachers College, yeah. I had when I was here in Durham, I received a letter from one of the guys who had been in the doctoral program when I was there, and he finally finished his dissertation, and he offered to send me a copy of his book, and I said, I won't read it, don't bother to send it to me, because I wasn't reading in that field.
Right.
And he wrote and said, it was really hard when you left, because I went around to find people who would work with me, and one of your ex-colleagues in the department said, well, we're not going to do any more of that philosophy stuff in this department. And I'm quite sure that was Gary. Griffin. Gary was an interesting guy, but neither Gary nor Ann had any real intellectual interest. They had interesting supervisory interests,
Right.
But their intellectual content was nil.
Right.
And Gordon McKenzie, who was chairman when I first went there, practically copied my stuff when he started to write in the area of politics and never acknowledged my influence.
My goodness, did you ever confront him?
No. And Alice was the one who consistently supported me. When it came, Teachers College, when I went there, had the tradition of, as quickly as possible, tenuring people. And it wasn't a matter of publication, it was a matter of getting that under your belt so you didn't have to worry about it, so you could do your work. And then when John Fisher came in and Larry became a major influence, that they tried to tighten up the academic standards. Bob Schaefer was dean at that time, and Alice, or I don't know where it came from, was pushing for my promotion to full professor. And Bob Schaefer was trying to institute, I think under Larry's pushing, the academic standards of Columbia, which was publications and things of that kind. And Bob wrote and said, you need to prepare, your file of what you've done and so on and so forth. And I wrote to him and said, Bob, your decision is to promote me or not to promote me. My decision is to stay or not stay. The two are completely not related, and I'm not going to organize my material for you. And
a different era it was.
Oh, totally different era. And Alice was the one who prepared.
Did she do that?
She did it, yeah.
Isn't that something?
So she was very supportive of me. She wanted me to publish stuff. Because the summer that I took off, which must have been the summer of probably 64, I'm not sure of that, where I did much of that writing on elementary school stuff.
Was the elementary school curriculum adequate?
Well, that was a speech. That was a speech.
The Englewood study? Is it?
That was Harry asked me to do that. I did a series of articles on the teacher and classroom action and things of that kind.
Well, there's some of that in the collection.
Yeah, there's a lot of that's all in the collection. That all came out of a summer's work at my summer off, which I spent 6 weeks on Martha's Vineyard.
We had dinner one night in Rochester at the University of Rochester Faculty Club, I believe, and you talked about that summer, but you talked about reading Heidegger. Or do I have it mixed up?
No. Well, no, I wasn't. I focused in on Heidegger when I was at the University of Wisconsin for a year sabbatical.
I see.
I might have been reading Heidegger at that time, but I doubt it because that summer was spent writing and reading poetry.
Oh, really?
I would go to Gret and her husband Hank drove me to Martha's Vineyard because I didn't have a car. I'd given up the car in in New York. Rented an apartment in Vineyard Haven. Would bicycle about 3 miles to the beach every morning. Would spend my time on the beach reading Shakespeare and other poet, Robert Frost, and who's the
You have a lot of Hopkins in your...
I was reading Hopkins, yeah. But I did not...
Hopkins, no.
But I was reading, who's the gal, the New England gal? The one that lived...
Right, Dickinson.
No, not Dickinson, the other gal out of New York. Names are...
Yeah.
And I would spend the time on the South Beach where I was totally alone, taking off all my clothes, reading and swimming and sleeping, and then bicycling back to my apartment, having lunch, taking a nap, and spend the evening writing.
My goodness.
because I was trying to learn something about writing.
Did it come easier?
Yeah, I was able to turn out a variety of stuff at that time. It wasn't quite deep enough in some ways, but at least flowed. And I used it then in my course in elementary school curriculum.
So those are in those notes.
Yeah, those are a few of those were published, but much of them remained unpublished. And Alice sort of hoped that I would publish them. But I've always had a really hard time rewriting. You know, I can lecture and I can write drafts, and I hate to rewrite my stuff. I just absolutely hate it. And I wasn't inclined to prepare it for publication. Yeah, so and some of it ended up in publication, but not.
Maybe some of these other pieces can be
so
rescued.
yeah.
So it was quite a special summer.
It was a great summer,
Yeah.
and I came back. That was really interesting. You know, I came back to my apartment in New York and took one look at me in the mirror and didn't recognize myself.
You were that dark.
I was that dark. I was so dark.
You've had no repercussions on you.
No. I browned easily at that time, and I'm not sure I could do it today. I know I couldn't do it today.
I've had skin cancer removed several times.
But I was shocked to see myself in the bathroom mirror in New York City. Yeah. But that was 6 weeks of sun.
Yeah, and so you weren't
Totally brown all over. I mean,
Yeah. So you weren't able to replicate it the summer after.
well, let's see. That must have been.
That's 64. You said. You thought.
I think it was 64. I think we'd have to look at those dates because the following fall, I remember registering students for my class, or registering my advisees, and one of them said, "I'll see you around." And I said, "No, you'll see me in my class." And it was Jennifer Holmes, who became my wife. So she must have been in that class 65. I then recommended that she become the school teacher at Agnes Russell, and that was the 66, 67. And we married. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And we were married in 68. So that, yeah.
And this photograph must be 6 years or so after that with the two daughters.
Yeah, let's see, how old are the kids? How old do the kids look? About 5, 6?
Sort of 2 to 5, maybe, yeah.
Oh, yes, 3 to 5, 6. So that, Morley was born in 69.
Morley.
Was my oldest,
Yeah.
Gillian was born in 72.
All right.
So that was probably 74, 75.
And that's your apartment in New York.
No, that was my house up in Connecticut, up in New York State.
So you had a summer house, or?
When we married, I was dating somebody, and we would occasionally go to Long Island or Fire Island for the summer, not for the summer, but for the day or something of that kind. And when we married, it was important to do things on weekends, and we tried to go to the beach. And I had her car at that time, and the crowds were horrendous at that time. This was in the late 60s. And we decided that going to the beach on a weekend made no sense. So we bought a VW camper, thinking, okay, if we can't go to the beach, maybe we could at least go up in the country. And we went up to the country a couple times, maybe for a year we tried it. And the campgrounds around New York were as crowded as the beach. And we finally decided that was no way to spend our summers either. So I had a friend up in New York State near Chatham, and we started to look for a house.
I forget where Chatham is. Is it?
Chatham is north of New York City, about 90 miles.
So,
It's about
and
30.
River-
It's about 30 miles from Tanglewood. 20 miles from Tanglewood,
Oh, all right.
right on the foothills.
Massachusetts border. Yeah, near the Massachusetts
Yeah,
border.
yeah, right in the map. Yeah, yeah. Great house. We bought it.
And how close to Tanglewood did you get to go to Tanglewood?
Oh, we went there frequently. Yeah, yeah, we'd go there. It was great, really great. The house was a really old probably an 1840.
Farmhouse or? An old
Yeah, it was an old, probably it was a farming community. I don't know who was in it, but it was a mess. I bought it for $18,000, as I recall. And when I went to sort of see whether we would be interested, went down in the basement and there was a little stream flowing through the basement. So I talked to one of the local farmers that we became close to. And I said, there's a stream down there. He said, it's been there for 100 years. What are you worrying about?
Flooding, perhaps.
No, it didn't flood. It came in one side and went out the other. They had holes.
Spring?
Well, it was a lovely, an absolutely, I have some pictures of the house someplace. A lovely place. And so I,
Able to spend the whole summer there.
well, the family would spend the summer because Teachers College had a strong summer program, you know.
Yeah, that's what I'm fishing for.
Yeah, no, and I had to teach every summer.
I bet.
And so the kids and Jennifer would go up there during the summer, and then I would go up on weekends. And during the fall and the spring, we would drive up there for a weekend because we could drive up there in about an hour and a half, 2 hours, something like that.
Did it have the heat? Did you? Well, you must have gone in the winter because you had.
Well, we closed the house at Christmas time. We would be up there at Christmas time and then close it until Easter time. And I managed to redo a couple of the rooms. In fact, I tore out one of the walls and exposed the beams, which were hand-hewn beams, and put in wallboard myself. In tearing out one of the walls, we found a little note, letter that had been written. It was written in the 1880s or something like that, talking about the sleigh rides in that area with horses and the snowfalls and things of that kind. They're really great. Then I remodeled one room thoroughly and was starting to remodel another, and we decided to redo the kitchen and put a window in the dining room there. So had that done professionally, and they did a beautiful job. But it was that year that I then gave up Teachers College, and so we had to sell a house in order to bought the house for $18,000, sold it for $68,000. 10 years later, not 10 years later, less than 10 years later, it was about 10 years later, yeah. So.
Sounds like you have fond memories of the.
Oh, it was a great house. Yeah, and the kids loved it. When we moved to Connecticut, we were able to sell that house and move the furniture of that house to the house in Connecticut. And when we closed that house down, I had to physically pull my oldest daughter away from the door jamb.
Oh, wow.
She was crying.
Oh.
And by the time we got in the car, all four of us were crying. You know, it was really, because it was a great family house. Yeah, so great.